Okay, we're picking up on about the middle or close to the end of page 47. Chapter 4. So we just pick up and start reading. The preface, of course, we did a little bit last week. It's in the middle where it says, "Good and wise friends, this teaching of ours from its very inception has taken freedom from thought as its source, freedom from appearances as its essence, freedom from clinging as its basis." And now we go on where he's going to describe what this means. Freedom from appearances means to be detached from appearances while in the midst of appearances. Freedom from thought means detachment from thought in the midst of thought. And freedom from clinging is the basic nature of human beings in this world of good and evil, human beings, period. In this world of good and evil, beauty and ugliness, enemies and friends, even during times when one meets with insults, criticism, verbal attacks, bullying, treat all of this as empty and harbor no thoughts, either of delight or of revenge. In each continuing moment of thought, do not dwell on previous thoughts. If you think about previous thoughts, the present thought, and take up future thoughts, then your thoughts will continue without cease. This is bondage. Even if in each continuing moment of thought you do not cling to anything at all, this is freedom from bondage. This is the meaning of not clinging is our basis. So he'll go on and do two stages of this, but let's look at the first stage as he starts to take this apart. First of all, he's saying what defines our school or this teaching are these three basic concepts. In Chinese, it's Wu Nian, Wu Xiang Wu Nian, and Wu Zhu. The thing to note here that's kind of significant is you don't have to place this in any cultural context. And people like to do that a lot and say, oh, this is a religion of this area or whatnot. If you look at the way he's presenting this, it's very accessible. It's very stripped of any what you could say is dogmatics or beliefs or creed. It's a very straightforward statement. It's almost psychological in its direction here. Thought, appearances, dwelling or clinging, freedom from, freedom from, freedom from. There's no mention of other powers here. There's no mention of ghosted spirits or other realms. It's really directly talking right to the mind. And as we unpack it, we'll see that it is very accessible. This is not something that's out of the reach of any of us. In fact, while it reaches beyond where any of us might be at this point, it's not beyond the reach of any of us applying and using this. This is really what I would call liberated pragmatics. This is really the pragmatics of liberation and unbinding, the pragmatic aspects of awakening. So, freedom from appearances. This has always been somewhat difficult to translate because there's two ways to come at it. Appearances mean as things present themselves to us in an ordinary way. Sights, sounds, smells, taste, touch. These all have characteristics. So you could say characteristics for Xiang. It also means mark, M-A-R-K, marked by, distinguished by. That's another way of looking at distinctions. Still, we're in a way of looking at this as a dualistic. In other words, it is what appears to us as distinguished, as a mark, as a designation or a characteristic. And that's okay. And the text will say all of these things, as they appear to us, fundamentally are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, dewdrops, and flash of lightning. It's not that they're not there, but they have no real substance of their own. They're in flux, they're impermanent, they're shifting and changing. So one level of not freedom from appearances is to just recognize that the whole phenomenal world, as it appears to us, is something that is fluid and flux changing, and there's no place that you can grab and take hold of it. So that's a very basic beginning level of understanding what freedom from appearances means. But we have to, I think, if we're going to get to where he's going, we have to take it a bit further. And that means we have to change it into marking or appearance making or designating. In other words, as they appear to us is to assume that we are somehow in a neutral, objective position to observe things, quote, as they are. But what the text is suggesting here is we turn things into something by marking them, by designating them, by characterizing them. And so this is more getting into the activity of the mind that will take something that, from the point of view of the text, is empty. It has no fundamental underlying nature of its own. But then we mark, we designate, we characterize, we frame, we project, we construct. We do this kind of activity. The Buddha called this the architect, or Bob the Builder. I have to go back to my little nephew. He likes Bob the Builder. So this is Bob the Builder. And when the Buddha says this house shall be built no more on his awakening, he means he's not going to be constructing an artificial reality held up by the unawakened consciousness. So it doesn't mean reality goes away. All it means is it reveals itself for what it really is. So actually the first level is saying all conditioned things appear to us in this way, their marks, their characteristics, their empty flow. That's okay, but it's still not taking you into the equation where you need to be, which is, well, why are they that way? Why don't I just see them as they are? And not even because we mark and we characterize because of attachment and grasping and confused thinking. You could say because of attention and relationship. That's another way to translate grasping, attaching, and false thinking. So the grasping, attaching is relational. We have a relationship with them. And the confusion is the attention. If you understand, in other words, we attend to them in ways that are not as they really are, but ways we would want to make them. So those two things are the inattentiveness or the lack of clear attention, and then relational. My teacher used to call it the Velcro thing. Back in when we first talking, this was like early 70s. Velcro had just come out. Anybody have Velcro? No? Oh, yeah, you have Velcro? Do a Velcro. Okay, yeah. So he said, what we do is our mind and Velcro and the conditioned world we stick together. He says we're sticking to everything. There's the sticking consciousness. This is the relational, the grasping consciousness, and it grabs onto everything. And then it's hard to pull it apart. So you could say it's glue, but he used Velcro, which was because everything that then was coming out was Velcro, and it really caught with us. And so he said these two things. And so when you see freedom from appearances, you have to then start to think about it not just as I should see through the conditioned world of designated things and see them as they really are. There's no there, there's no nature of their own. They only have a nature, or they only have meaning in relationship to something else. Okay, so this is called conditioned existence. Things don't exist by themselves. They exist in relationship to something else. All the parts of a building, for example, the floor, the ceiling, the roof, only become such in their relationship to everything else that they're connected with. There's no roof independent of the thing that it's covering, so on and so forth. So this is a very straightforward. But the other one that's more interesting is our doing, our designating, our marking, our attaching. And this is really where he's going, because the first level in a sense, is a constant bit of a struggle. You're kind of having to always see through things. You always have to remind yourself that they're dreams, illusions, bubbles, and shadows, but your first impulse is, it's mine. No, I don't want, this is. And so he's going to a deeper level and says, that's not freedom. That's still a bit of a struggle. Now, you're struggling to be free, but struggling to be free is really not free. Free is like you're not even aware that you're struggling to be free anymore. That's what he calls, wuxiang, without mark. So here, it would mean something that you're doing constantly. It's not a state you attain. So these description of without appearances, without clinging, without thought, these are not states of mind you must attain. They're actually ongoing practices. This is an ongoing use of your consciousness 24/7. This is why he calls it the I Xing San Mei, the single practice samadhi. It's not something you get. It's something that you are working with, practicing, using all the time. Because as soon as you get it, there's a kind of dwelling, there's a kind of setting up, and then you get stuck again. So it has to be very dynamic, ongoing, functional or functioning. So the marking is very interesting because it involves a reflective exercise that we begin to understand or see or feel how we turn things into something that they're not because of our either wanting or grasping or attaching, or our fear and aversion, both sides of grasping and attaching or confusion. Now the classic example that's given, I was thinking about from the text, is the one about the rope. So not here in Berkeley, it wouldn't happen, but let's say you're back in Malaysia or India, or even better, the place I never wanted to go to because there was too many of them there, is Lanto Island off of Hong Kong, where we have a monastery, but Lanto Island also has a lot of snakes. And I have not gotten over my aversion to snakes, and so I don't like snakes. And so Heng Shui would always talk to me from Lanto and say, oh man, this morning during the morning recitation there was a big python, or there's a big this snake or that snake scrolling around. He says, I was walking to get tea and one hung down from the rafter right in front of me. Like, whoa, okay. So the snake thing is used where somebody says on the island, they're walking and it's dusk, and they see what appears to be a snake and they have a fearful reaction, like me. But then upon closer examination, they realize it's just a rope. It's a piece of rope. It's not a snake. And so they go from that to the rope, but then the text says the next thing, and they realize the rope is just twisted braids of hemp, and hemp is just basically, cellular cellulose held together by such and such, and then they break down the nature of something down into its fundamental emptiness. So these three stages of working with it is getting at the point where you are marking or designating something as such because you want it, or you fear it, or you want to push it away, or you want to possess it, or you want to use it to set up an identity. So this designating of things, or this marking of things, is a really difficult activity of mind to work with and get a handle on. But this is what I think he's suggesting, the depth of what he's suggesting from freedom from appearances. So just to put that out. Freedom from thought means detachment from thought in the midst of thought. Now this is interesting because he doesn't say freedom from thought means no thought. Or no thought doesn't mean no thought. Sorry. Not exactly means no thought. He says a detachment from thought in the midst of thought. So it doesn't mean that you stop thinking. And you can see from context of this text again and again, he takes ordinary understandings and turns them around so we get past the limitations of the concept or conceptualizing of this. If you start to get into, it's no thought, and that's how we're going to translate it, and then worse, you begin to practice according to that, you will end up, as he says, either totally bound up or insensate. And these would not be indicators that you had been liberated. In fact, you had bound yourself up. So we have to be very careful to read this both in the context of where it's occurring, in other words, what comes before and after. And I think, go back, apart from appearances, but you're in the midst of appearances. Now you could say, I can be apart from appearances, I'm just going to pull away and sit in a cave. Or I'm going to, and live in darkness, so to speak, and live in deafness, and live in feelinglessness, and have, no smells and so forth, and then I'll be apart from appearances. And what he says here is, if you do that, you will cut off your awakened nature. So we have to be careful. But then if I don't do that, I'm just going to be swept along by this. So is he playing with us or what? Is this like playful samadhi stuff? I don't think so. I think what he's saying is the deep freedom from appearances means that you have shifted your mind to such a place that right in the midst of things you see them for what they are and you're not swept along by them. Now you could say detachment, but detachment means you're not swept. So detachment is one way of saying you let go, maybe, you don't pick up. See, you have to detach only after you pick up, but if you don't pick up, that's the freedom from. Now, if you pick up and you're starting to hold it, you will drown in these attachments. So he says, then you detach and you let go. And you call that a liberation. But the liberation that's deeper than this, you don't pick it up in the first place. So that means in the midst of appearances, you do not grasp, attach, cling, identify, designate as me or mine or something like that. Now, that doesn't mean you don't see things. And I'm going to go into this a little more because somebody asked last week after class, well, what about feelings and emotions? And I said, absolutely get rid of them. That's why he's not here tonight. He did. No, I was just hoping, I was just joking. Okay, joke, everybody. So he is not saying you get rid of or you leave appearances. He's not saying you get rid of or you leave thought. And he's not saying you don't dwell anywhere. What he is saying is that you don't set up in these. So you think, you feel, you have consciousness, you're aware, you're awake, you're alert, you're attuned. And at the same time, you are not clinging to or grasping or identifying onto those things that you're observing. And even in your heart, there's no wish or wanting to do that because you know intrinsically, one, it doesn't work, and two, it's vain, it's empty. And so what happens here is it's not like you tell yourself, I don't want, I'm not going to. You don't even, this is past that stage. It's intrinsically, it's almost like your nature now is at that place where it does not stir in you. And it's not a feeling of loss. It's not a feeling like, oh, I did something. It's just like natural. It's as natural as you go outside and it's raining, you think, I better cover my head. You don't go through a whole metaphysical contemplation of rain and da-da-da. You just naturally do this. When it's time to stretch, you stretch. He's saying when thought is appropriate, you think, but you don't keep the thought. You don't anticipate in advance. Oh, tonight I'm going here, and I'm going to say or think or feel or, da-da-da that. And nor do you go, tonight I went there, and I should have, I would have, I could have, I might have, blah, 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 thought, felt, da-da-da. No, you're right in you're in situ, you're in the situation, and you're responding appropriately. You're doing what is appropriate. You're thinking appropriately, you're responding to appearances appropriately. At the same time, you're not setting up anywhere to make it me or mine. This is what he calls zidzai. This is what he calls freedom from. Now you can see none of this so far is like religious. This is really basic psychological, emotional, if you want to push it a little, spiritual liberation. But it's not far out. And it's something that we know we do, and we know we can change if we had, some technique to work with, but this is accessible.
So what's the role in this for focused, effortful thought thinking? And is that, I'm having trouble figuring out if that's even really possible unless you attach to your thoughts. how can you actually construct a thought? That's what I do for my business, you know? That's what I do for my livelihood, is I construct thoughts. And so, how do you do that without attaching to them?
Oh, I thought you were going to talk, you were talking focused thought in terms of meditation.
No,
No.
I'm talking about practice, you know, well, could be in meditation as well, I suppose, but what we're talking about here is a practice that is constant. It's not just in meditation, right?
If you look at what he's saying, he is not saying you stop doing the daily affairs and activities of what it means to be in the realm of people.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
You have a career, hopefully it's a right career, in other words, right livelihood. I mean, that's a basis to start. Because if you really think about this, this is very nuanced. If indeed he says it's not just pulling away from the world, denying, renouncing the world, and at the same time disavowing responsibilities. Okay, you know, I'm escaping responsibilities, I'm free. That's not what he's saying at all. So somehow he's asking us to contemplate, to try to wrap our minds and bodies around a concept that right in the midst of doing what needs to be done, we're at the same time free from that somehow. Whoa, what is that like? And we'd have to ask in every situation. Let's just look at a career. Obviously, the first step would be in terms of the Eightfold Path, you find a career that is not unwholesome. So it's called right or wholesome or skillful livelihood. Skillful in the sense that the livelihood is sustaining you, hopefully sustaining or not harming anybody else. And so if you're there, you can, in a sense, relax. You won't be relaxed if your livelihood compromises your conscience and your integrity. And so then you're getting feedback from your livelihood that makes it hard to be unattached in the midst of this, because already it's a livelihood that's bound up with harm, selfishness, exploitation, ripping off others, ripping off the planet, so on and so forth, and you don't get freedom. But that doesn't mean you don't have a livelihood. Then you select a livelihood, you try to select a livelihood, but even that doesn't guarantee that you can still have this freedom, because you could turn the livelihood, even though it's proper, into a form of identity attachment. For example, you could say, I'm going to set up a nonprofit NGO, but really have two sets of books, and one is going to really bring in some money here, and the other one's going to look great. It won't work. And you could say, well, I'm going to be a physician. Okay, are you going to be a physician who, in some altruistic sense, says, I'm going to serve communities where, because of all various things, they have no medical services, very poor medical services, children's mortality is higher than normal, all of these diseases that could be prevented are just running roughshod and these people don't have a lot of money to pay, and so on and so forth. Or I think I'm going to specialize in plastic surgery for Hollywood. Okay, so if you specialize plastic surgery for Hollywood, you could turn what is basically a noble profession into something that's at best superficial, and at worst feeding people's egos and whatnot, and really not using medical skills to benefit others widely, but only to serve a very rich, narrow clientele, and so on and so forth. So even the profession itself doesn't guarantee. But even, let's say you find that and you get in there, somehow you would have to do what it means to do it well without at the same time getting attached to it as being me, mine, my identity, who I am. Now this takes some skill. Maybe I'll go to another way that's really tough that I know, which is working with children. Okay, some of you are parents and you have children. Some of you are not and thinking about doing it. Some of you have and either are very happy or regrets, but whatever, it's a significant engagement with the world, okay? This is not like, it's even past livelihood a little. You can change jobs or you can't change kids. It's like, I don't like these, I'll take them back to Walmart, get a new set. No, it doesn't work. You got them, they're yours, and you work with them. Working with children, there is this very fine line of being amazingly attentive in relationship and at the same time be effective, not attached, not clinging, not projecting. Now, I'm making it more immediate because anything can work like this. We're asked in the bodhisattva sense, or in this sense, to be in those relationships, to be responsible in those relationships, to be liberating in those relationships, and at the same time not be clinging, projecting, or attaching. So you can do this with children. Your role becomes much more of, that's my child, as that is a child. And that is a child who has their own potentials, sensibilities, and so forth, and seeds, and my job is not to manipulate or genetically engineer those seeds, but simply create the conditions that allow those to come to fulfillment. And then the child moves on, and our relationship is very natural, and it moves on and it's over. Instead of saying, my whole life depends on you making it for me. Unless you get into that institution and get this 7-figure salary and blah, 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 you failed me as a parent.
I think many people easily fall into those kinds of relationships, and because it's expedient, right? It's a way to motivate yourself very quickly and cheaply, is to just say, oh, you're my everything. You know, everything depends on you, and therefore I'm going to, you know, take care of my child as if this child was the entire world to me. That's an expedient thing to do, because it really motivates you, you know. And so
expedient has two sides. It can be skillful and unskillful.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And so this is an unskillful, but you see where that's coming from.
Yeah.
That particular move has to do with, I have not listened to myself. I've not examined myself. I've left all these unresolved issues, who I am, what I'm about, what's the meaning of life, what happens as I get old and die. I just push that all off, and I transfer it to these kids and ask them to carry this unresolved questions for me.
But it's expedient in the short term.
It's very expedient in the short
If you're
term.
having trouble motivating yourself, you can really motivate yourself quickly by saying, this is the only meaningful thing.
Well, and sometimes that's how people have kids. I mean, I'm being frank, you know. It's like it gives you a motivation.
Right.
It sort of gives you some meaning and purpose. But again, it's really short-sighted to be mild about it, and it's somewhat self-centered in the sense that you're not then coming as a liberated person, as a teacher, say, with the child. You're coming as an owner of the child. You're coming as a contract with the child. I will give you this and this, and as I get older, you will do this and this for me, and that's why it's a quid pro quo relationship. All of this messes up the freedom, the flow of things. So when that child, just like when a bird's ready to leave the nest, you don't say, oh, don't leave me, you know, I'll be lonely in the nest and so forth. So the bird never flies, it just stays there and withers in the nest. Or you say, but you can leave, but bring me back this kind of food and stuff that I like. And so the bird never goes off and does her own thing. I mean, I don't want to push this too far. You get where I'm going. So just as it's natural for things to come into being, to be in some relationship, to let go and to move on, these are the 4 signs, the 4 characteristics. There's, you know, spring, summer, fall, winter. There is coming into being, there's dwelling, there's getting old, and there's going. And if you do not grasp and attach in the midst of that, things naturally just go away. Now, this is not the prajna paramita yet, but this is kind of the wisdom that's above the ordinary. This is closer to a Confucian and maybe even a Taoist sense of the way things are. For example, when, who is it? Is it Zhuangzi's wife dies? Right, there's a wonderful passage, Zhuangzi's wife dies. This is Taoist. Zhuangzi's wife dies. His friend comes over, and Zhuangzi's sitting there with a pot turned upside down going, you know, dum-da-da-dum, da-da-dum, dum, tiddly-dum, ta-dum-dum-dum. And the friend says, oh my God, what are you doing? Are you nuts? You're not being proper. Your wife's died. She's lying in state in the next room. And here you are drumming on a pot like you had no care in the world. And there's no grief. And he says, oh, no, don't get me wrong. Initially, I felt a grief. I felt a torment. My wife was gone and leaving. And he said, but then I contemplated, well, before she came, there was nothing. She came into this world. She got a definition. We had a relationship. We maybe had children or not. I don't know. And then things moved on. He says, just like there's spring, and then there's summer, and then there's fall and there's winter. Everything moves in these cycles. And so she now is in the winter of her seasons, and she's quietly resting. Why would I be wailing and moaning out here and disturbing her quiet, peaceful winter, asking her to come back to something she couldn't return to in the natural course of things, and so forth? And he unpacks his first response, which is to dwell, attach, and go, and he starts to unpack it in a very both emotional and intellectual way so that he's free from that. Okay, so he's in that world, he's in those relationships, yet at the same time he's found a way to work in such a way as to not get stuck or attached there. And that's why I think this is somewhat, I could call it a mature teaching. The immature part is just say, pull out, drop out, forget everything. Yeah, but that's not going to work. But even if it did work, it's not mature because it's not the way we are. We don't come into this world alone. I mean, you'd like to think, no, we don't. I didn't come into this world alone. Really, no. I had I'll be born and here I am, and who are these two people that are feeding and clothing me? Get out of my way. No, you come in relational. You live in relational. You go out in relational. Now, existentially, maybe at the very end, there's a sense that you're alone, but even when you're gone, the impact of your relational still is with those who are left behind. And wherever you're going, there's more relations. So there's no way you ever escape this. There's continuity of existence in Buddhism. From day to day, thought to thought, life to life. Okay, so forget about this idea that it all ends someplace. There's just continuity. So you work with the continuity within that. That's where you get the freedom working within that, not outside of that. Because to be outside of that is to be outside of reality. And to be outside of reality, I don't know how that's possible. I can't wrap my mind around that. So the answer to the question is, I think one way you would do this is there's markers. In other words, you can abstract about it and say, well, how would I make a business plan and not have a thought? I will not invest in your business because it's not going anywhere. Right? You market, what he would say, you market by klesha. In other words, if in the midst of your affairs, klesha is arising, anger, greed, jealousy, anxiety, stress, burnout, worry, laziness, escapism, blah, blah, let's go through the list. If that's arising, you're still not there yet. Mm-hmm. But if you can do that, and you're within the state of without klesha, which is by definition bodhi, which is your basic nature, then there's nothing you can't do in this state of freedom. But if you can't get to that place, there's nothing you can do that will give you that freedom. So once again, we're back to this mature sort of thing. It's up to you. In this sense, it is all about you or me. We are radically responsible for how we control our lives and destinies. At the same time, we're radically free to exercise. And that radical freedom that he's talking about here means it's how you do rather than what. Now, at some basic level, I want to go back and say, it's not just how, it's what. You can do things that are just at prima facie bad, wrong, harmful. You can't say, well, I am in a very unattached state as I make these chemical and biological weapons. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't match, okay? These are for harm, they're not for good. Making them, even if you think you're unattached while you're making them, as the song said about Werner von Braun, I make the rockets, I shoot them up, where they come down, that's not my department, said Werner von Braun. No, you don't go to that. You're making rockets with they're going to cause harm. But outside of that, if you're into a relatively good thing, then it's really about your intentionality and your state of mind and whether you can get into this. But one of the ways to measure whether or not you have this freedom, it's visceral, man. You can feel it. You can feel if while you're doing something, you are in your space, you're enjoying it. I don't mean you're like high. I mean, there's just no friction. There's nothing. It's so natural. It's just like a laugh comes or a sneeze comes. It's just like everything is just flowing unobstructed, clean, and pure because your vocation, your avocation, your intention, your action are all in sync, all non-dual. You're doing what you want to do because you want to do it. And because you want to do it, you're doing it to the maximum of your performance. And you're doing it because of good intentions. You're not out to rip it and you go, oh, this is really good. There's a freedom there. And so this freedom is not stillness. It's a dynamic, unattached activity. It's creative. So the way I would say to go about looking at that is very pragmatic. Look for the markers. If this is creating afflictions, even if it's, quote, meditation, even if it's, quote, going to the temple, If you're getting afflicted, something's wrong. Now, you could conclude, well, I could go to a different temple. No. Or I could sit with a different meditation technique. No. It's the mind that you're bringing to it that makes it right or wrong, not necessarily the thing in itself. Okay, good question. I didn't mean to go on about it, but let's go back here. So, freedom from appearances, you're still in appearances. Freedom from thought, you're still thinking. You haven't turned thought off. My teacher had a verse, the eye see forms, the eye is aware of things, but inside it's quiet. The ears hear the sounds, but the mind doesn't know in the sense of grasping. Then the next part says, correct thought, right in thought, you're apart from thought. You think, but keep no thought. So this is describing it. You think, but you keep no thought. You don't hold to it in the sense that this is me, this is mine, and so forth. So you are responsive without grasping. But to be non-responsive is the danger, he says, of misinterpreting this teaching. Okay. So this is why he says the way place is the world. The world is the way place. Bodhi is not apart from this world, and this world is not apart from Bodhi. Basically, there's not one thing where can dust to light. Dust is not the problem. Okay? It's what you make of that. Dust is dust. Things are things. They're not intrinsically good or bad, right or wrong. You don't have to sweep them away, as Shen Shou said. Sweep it clean, let no dust alight. He said dust is not a problem unless you make it a problem. Unless you attach to it and call it dust and make it dust and da-da-da. So here you have freedom from... Now the freedom from clinging, this is very interesting. This is zhu, which means literally to dwell. That's one meaning of this word. But to dwell means to dwell on. Don't think it as homeless. This is not talking about being homeless. Dwelling means, like, you ever hear that expression? Don't dwell on it. What does that mean?
Ruminate.
Yeah, that's good word. Ruminate. Wallow. I love ruminate because I grew up on a dairy farm, so... Now, some of you are nodding. People are saying, what's a dairy farm? What's a... A dairy farm is where milk comes from. Really? I thought it came from Safeway. No, it comes from cows. Except in Berkeley, it comes from goats and sheep and all kinds of things that give milk. But, normally it comes from cows. But cows ruminate. They got a couple stomachs, right? So they swallow something, then they sit and they bring it back up and they chew on it again. They ruminate, chew it over again and again. Yeah, well, next time you have milk, think of that. So the ruminating means to let it down, bring it back up, chew on it again, bring it down, bring it back up. That's to ruminate. So it's a very visceral Anglo-Saxon word, ruminate, coming from the rumen, which is that stomach of the cow. You bring it back up again. So here, dwelling on it means to ruminate. That's one meaning of it, which would be attachment. But dwell also means, in any basic sense, to grab or to attach. So it's used interchangeably with graha. What's the Chinese? There's zhu and then there's zhuo. Zhuo. Ni shuo hao. Zhuo means, right, to grab. And so the Chinese for the graha Sanskrit is not just zhu, but it's also zhuo. And in fact, zhuo and zhu are used interchangeably in some of the early languages to describe marriage. So marriage is a forming of a, I'll give you the Sanskrit later. The Sanskrit involves, a union. And so the word to dwell or to grasp or attach also it's used positively to describe a bonding or coming together. But here, it's not just referring to people when they say no dwelling. I don't know if that resonates. You say no dwelling. No thought, no appearances, and no dwelling. But if you say it has no grasping, no attaching, no projecting out, to own, to possess. And I actually like grab, because that's the Sanskrit root of this, to grab, to reach out and grab. That's the first sign of what the psychological impulse behind this is. And from the Sixth Patriarch's point of view, that doesn't mean you don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't wear clothes. You do these to stay within a middle way, okay? But going for more is where it gets into attachment. So when it's fulfilling basic needs, this is not attachment, okay? Like having enough food, clothes, and so forth, that's not attachment. It's the extra reaching out, the grabbing for more when it's not needed that defines a psychological impulse, which the Sixth Patriarch says comes from a misreading of who we are and what we're about. We misperceive that we're inadequate, lacking something, and because of that, we think then we need to grab and hold and secure. And so he says, beyond the basics, this turns into the frenzy of the unexamined life, grasping, attaching, acquiring, holding on to, fearing that we'll never have enough, and that's driven by the confusion, by not attending to the here and now. So he says that lack of attention, that confusion, then leads to this grasping behavior. It has nothing to do with basic needs. This has to do with more. There's some wonderful passages in the Tao Te Ching saying, Zhi Changlu, if you know enough, if you know where there's enough, you'll always be happy. But not knowing where enough is, not knowing where to stop, you invite danger, you invite disaster. And so it's like, I always think the best, I'm giving my ideal speech to graduates. It's like, everybody gets up there, the world is yours. Just fill your balloon and float away. There's nothing you can't do. There's no limits to your knowledge and imagination, except the market. But no, go ahead, and your loans, go ahead and fly. And I just say, nah, I don't think so. There's some things you shouldn't do. You should know where to stop. You should know when to say enough. Do not allow your imagination to be fed by this insatiable wanting, craving, to think there's nothing you can't do. And I would say this is even true. Now I'm going to step out of my space a little and editorialize. Even if you can, it's not for sure you should. Okay? Even if you can, it's not for sure you should. There are some things that we have basic to us in human knowledge that we can do. But whether we should or not makes a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom would say, if I do this, if I invent this, if I set this going, what will be the consequences for myself or others, for myself and the planet, for living beings present and living beings to come? This is called wisdom. And just because you can invent something or make something or generate something doesn't mean you necessarily should. This is a thing that's lacking in our somewhat today in modern thought. The ancients had a sense of this. It's really interesting. They very much had a sense of Zhongdao, middle way, or Aristotle would say golden mean. And in fact, you read the Greek tragedies or whatnot, you see it always comes from overstepping the mean, going beyond what is natural to us, trying to be gods when we shouldn't. So you want to see a great movie or read the book, then go to the movie. Sorry. You want to see The Man Who Would Be King. It's a Rudyard Kipling story. It's a wonderful story, wonderful book about two conscript soldiers wanting to be gods. And they were serving in India. It's a really wonderful story, but it's a tragedy. The Greeks had the same sense. It's by overstepping our natural boundaries, even though we have the knowledge to do that, that we then fall into error and create havoc. So knowing when to stop is really key. If you look at all the Greek tragedies, they always come from overestimation of one's abilities, overextending oneself, and then inviting disaster. Very close to what Zhuangzi was saying, and very close to what the Buddha means by contentment. We always say contentment. Contentment, we think of course, the cow after it ruminates. The cow's like, contented cows, right? No, contentment is not like what you feel after Thanksgiving meal on the couch. Contentment is knowing when to stop. Contentment is sustainability. Okay, so what the text is talking about, what the Buddha would call contentment, the Greeks would call the golden mean, knowing enough, knowing when to stop. In fact, to berate you a little bit about this, and maybe I've said it before, the famous one is Prometheus, who was a Greek titan. Everybody know Prometheus? Interesting name to rocket after Prometheus. But anyhow, Prometheus was a Greek titan who was punished by the gods for giving fire and technology to mankind. And you're thinking, well, those gods are really weird. Why did they punish him for that? And they told him not to give this to gift to mankind. And so his punishment was he was chained to a rock, and these birds came and picked his flesh apart and eyes and so forth. A pretty tough retribution for giving us science and technology, which is basically what it means. And the reason was not, if you read the text carefully, not because they disobeyed the gods that he was punished. He said, no. The reason we told you not to do it was because even you didn't have the wisdom to see that this was dangerous. You were giving to mere mortals immortal powers, or what the text calls creatures of a day. You were giving to creatures of a day, meaning us. We live inside a narrow little world of our day, like the frog at the bottom of the well, and think we have a grasp of reality. But in fact, we have powers that go beyond the day, that go beyond our generations. And so by giving mankind these powers without the wisdom to know these was opening a can of worms. So this Greek myth is it's a very old myth, but it's very telling about a sense even in the ancients had about just because we can doesn't mean we should, and that we have some responsibility for harnessing, challenging, and channeling our energies in our relationships, in our careers, in our science and technology, and even in study. Knowing when to stop. It's pretty tricky. It's like, well, you got a major, do a double major. You got a double major, do a triple major with 3 minors or 4 minors. Or keep going to school. Get your PhD when you're 96, and go for another one. And knowing when to stop is really critical, not just eating, sleeping, wearing clothes, but in the realm of the mind and imagination and so on and so forth. So this is a really important key concept that's coming out. That's where freedom resides. And when he says this one, the last line is very interesting. He says, freedom from clinging is the basic nature, the original nature of human beings. Whoa. Now this is very interesting what he's saying. He's not saying that the freedom from clinging is unnatural, goes against our nature, but in fact it complements and fulfills our natural. Because by nature, there is in fact nothing that we can cling to or hold to. We can't, as much as you'd like to, I don't know, let's see. Connie, how old are you? 24. Please stay 24 forever. Yeah, I know. See, you want to, but it's like, by the way, when's your birthday? Yeah, so at the end of this summer, we're all going to say, no happy birthday to Connie. Just going to ignore her birthday, and she'll stay 24 for another year. And we keep doing that, you'll stay 24 forever.
You couldn't pay me enough to stay 24 forever.
See, and this person says, you couldn't pay me enough to stay 24 forever. So it's like, where, 25? No, maybe 30? Well, wherever, 10, 3. The point is that our nature is such that we can't. Now, we screw ourselves up immensely by trying to, either by trying to get older faster. So when I was 14, I couldn't wait to get 16. It came so slowly because I could drive legally. I was driving illegally, but I could drive legally at 16. But then once you got 16, it was like, oh, if I get to be 18, I can do this. And then when I'm 21, I can do this. And then after 21, it starts to go downhill because the return on the investment is not the same. And now you're trying to put the brakes on and slow it down. And ironically, it seems to be going faster. So when you're approaching it that you want it, it's really slow. And when you get to the top of the hill and you want to slow it down, it's like whoosh, it's going down. And so you can't either way. Our basic nature is that we cannot hold and attach and grasp and cling. And yet we fight with this all the time. We make ourselves miserable either wanting this or wanting not this. And in fact, it just rolls on. It doesn't wait for anybody. And so the nature of things in our own nature to be in complement is just to accept and reside in this space. Now that's very commonsensical, and yet for some people it seems inaccessible and profound. This is profound wisdom. Be in your natural conditions for a start. for a start. That's just a start. This, again, I want to stress, is not prajnaparamita, but it's just saying be fully human in the most common, ordinary, sensical, true ways. We're born, we age, we die. That's to be human. To resist this, or to think you're going to, fight against it, that you're going to invest in some technology that's going to keep you alive forever and ever, this is not knowing when to stop. This is not accepting. This is attaching and grasping. Oh no, we'll solve the problem of death and dying. No, it's grasping and attaching. Why is it a problem? Well, because I don't want to. As I was reading, one of the Silicon Valley CEOs is saying, I've been really pissed off all my life about death. I don't like it, and I'm going to do something about it. I won't tell you who it is. I'm going to invest billions of dollars to MIT biologists to come up with, and he's giving all this money, changing the investment scale of the scientific portfolio. So instead of investing on how do we solve the mosquito virus or malaria or cancer, we're going to spend all of the money that's available. We're going to tip the scales to find a way for the COO from Silicon Valley not to get old and die. Ooh. And why? Not because it's not natural, it's because I don't like natural and I'm going to redesign it. Okay, from the Greeks' point of view, it's like, ooh, ooh. The little chorus comes in and says, there's a tragedy coming, and it's coming pretty soon, everybody. And the hero goes, what, who said that? And it just rolls on. This is called hubris. So here, this idea that, we can impose our will on the nature of things is actually opposing our nature. It's opposing our nature. And so when he says this is our basic nature, he's giving us both a description, but also a prescription. He's also giving us a remedy for getting chilled a little bit and settling into the human condition. And then from that ground, working through the deeper layers to what he would call Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. But we cannot get to Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, complete and perfect awakening, until we perfect and understand and work through our humanity. It's not by going around it or transcending it or coming up with some pill that bypasses the human. It's by actually working in and through and perfecting the human. Chung is the word. Chung, to accomplish the human. That we then become this. So this is a sort of interpretive thing of the text, but I think it's really in line with the spirit of where he's going here. So we'll stop there for tonight. Next week, maybe I'll talk about emotions in this one, because these no thought appearances or clinging. But then what are we to do with, you asked about how do you live within the context of this in an ordinary way, but then you'd ask, well, what are we to do with our emotions and feelings? What role do they play, or what impediment do they pose to this? And there's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding this. So next week, we'll get emotional. Okay, any other points? Oh, there was a question. So I think the question is, stop false thinking is bodhi. I think that's probably meaning when the mad mind stops, this very stopping is bodhi?
Yes.
Okay. What does that mean? What does stop false thinking, or what does the mad mind stop means? Well, in a sense, the whole tonight answered it. It basically, to stop false thinking does not mean to stop thinking. So that's the first phase. Now there's two levels to that. To stop false thinking means to obviously not engage, entertain, dwell on, formulate, ruminate over thoughts or ideas that do not accord with the nature of things as they really are. Blanket, okay? So that would be wrong thinking. It's wrong in the sense that it does not match up to the nature of reality. For example, the last example, I'm going to beat death. I'm going to conquer dying by investing all my money in technology and more and more. And I'll pressure these scientists because I'm getting older and so on and so forth. That is false thinking because it is thinking wrongly thinking, wrongly conceptualizing, okay? If you want to use that expression. It doesn't mean it's false because it's bad. It means it's done wrongly. You're thinking wrongly about something. But also false thinking then has to do, or wrong thinking has to do with this notion we're talking about, even if it's not per se conceptually wrong or misguided, the motivation, the intention behind it is attaching and grasping. So when it says the mad mind stops, this stopping is bodhi, it means this mind, the constructing, grasping, manipulating, wanting, thirsting mind, when that stops, that very stopping is bodhi. That means that is our nature not to have that mind going. And so when that mind stops, we're back into our basic nature. Back into our basic nature is this original nature, this essential nature he talks about, and we're home. And when we leave that and think we're not whole and complete, think there's something to get, and so on and so forth, that becomes the mad mind grasping again. So it's interesting, he doesn't say when the mad mind stops, now you can get bodhi. You see, that would be a little tricky. Or if you stop the mad mind, you will get bodhi. That also wouldn't be the way to express it. It is in the very stopping that bodhi manifests by itself. And it's by the very activation of it and not controlling it that bodhi gets lost and twisted into afflictions, or water turns into ice. So I don't know if that answers her question. Sometimes I know with Chinese names, I don't. Is it a he or a she? So I say, Ta. Does that answer Ta's question? Okay. Okay, that's probably enough for tonight. We'll pick up again next week on this. Any announcements?
Tomorrow we have the 1 day with 1 new recitation. We start from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. And in the evening we have Avatamsaka lecture, 7:30, and all classes goes like usual. For more information, you can go for our website, berkeleymonastery.org.
What was that last thing you said?
Website?
Oh, website.
Yeah. berkeleymonastery.org.
berkeleymonastery.org.
Yeah, you can find more information about the classes.
Okay.
Tomorrow's students.
Website awakening. Okay, let's do the transference.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see, how hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise.